What does Ukraine get in return, Mr. President?
$350 billion and lots of equipment, military equipment, and the right to fight on. And
So have we gone from last week's 19th century colonial diktat of Ukraine, give us 50% of your minerals in exchange for absolutely nothing, to Donald Trump saying that in exchange for Ukraine's minerals, including those presumably under Russian occupation, the US is going to give Ukraine $350 billion, plus military equipment, plus the right to fight on. That seems like a remarkable reversal, that these guys are soon going to be getting even more military aid and financial support from the US than Ukraine received under Joe Biden in 3 years. So what can we make of all of this? Has Donald Trump completely flip-flopped in the space of a week, having met with Emmanuel Macron in the last 2 days? There seems to have been a bit of a change in tone from Donald Trump. Or is this just another negotiating tactic, maybe to scare the Russians into giving Donald Trump something even more in return? So what is going on? What can we surmise? Article came out in the Financial Times yesterday claiming that a minerals deal between the US and Ukraine was already agreed, and that Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, would actually fly to Washington on Friday and sign it, and maybe even meet Donald Trump in person and have a press conference. All speculation. However, what is contained in the deal is still very vague. When I read the Financial Times article, it seemed like it wasn't really a deal. It was more like a memorandum of understanding, and this 50% of Ukraine's minerals didn't seem to be clearly there anymore. Donald Trump has been talking about $500 billion that he wants. Then he's thrown out $300 billion and $350. And then, as I just played you the clip, he's suddenly saying Ukraine's going to get $350 billion. But is that additional? Or is he talking about the fictive, the imaginary $350 billion that he claims US has already given to Ukraine? Best estimates, it's roughly around $100 billion US dollars that the US has given to Ukraine since 2022 in terms of financial and military aid. And even that's probably a highball figure, because the US basically gave the military aid in terms of old stocks, and then they actually spent the money on replenishing their own stocks. So they invested in their own military industrial complex and then took those weapons for themselves and then sent the older ones to Ukraine, but then they put the accounting figure as what they had invested in the new ones. So they were never really sending that. But anyways, let's make it round and say 100 billion. And the European allies of Ukraine have actually given more than that, as Macron pointed out in his joint press conference about 2 days ago at this point with Donald Trump. So if this were to be true, it would mean that Ukraine would have the capacity to continue resisting Russian aggression and potentially even maybe reverse the situation on the battlefield. Or is this just another ruse by Donald Trump? Is he going to suddenly flip-flop tomorrow? We will have to wait and see what's actually in the deal, if it's really a deal, or is it just a memorandum of understanding and it's really a nothing burger, to quote an expression popular amongst those who are supporting Donald Trump and MAGA. And actually, it's really interesting. I got a lot of comments on my video from yesterday from people who support Russia or support Donald Trump, saying that Donald Trump has secured a deal, Zelensky has caved in. But there's no detail so far on what is actually in this minerals for aid deal. If you remember, Joe Biden gave this aid not in expectation that it would be repaid, broadly speaking. You can argue whether that's good or bad. However, going forward for future aid, it could be an opportunity for the US to actually make money out of backing Ukraine. It would probably tie the US closer to a Ukrainian victory, maybe, ultimately, or definitely as Ukraine coming out of this war as an independent sovereign state. And that would be obviously in Ukraine's interest. So this idea was originally Zelensky's anyways, to try and achieve that goal, since he seemed to realize that Donald Trump, having run a campaign where he was not going to support Ukraine going forward militarily or financially, and we had that whole series of shenanigans with the last aid package that was passed in the US Congress. It was over a year ago at this point, so back in 2024, where it was held up at the behest of MAGA. So it's very important to realize that if you are listening to only one type of source, you can get a very biased sense of what's going on. So if you're reading all the MAGA stuff, because it gets sent to me as well by other people, it's looking at it like he's got a deal, he's made Zelensky cave, but if he started off demanding 50% and 500 billion, all these numbers in exchange for nothing, and then finally he's actually giving Ukraine 350 billion, he's not giving them security guarantees, it seems from what he said, which is another negotiating demand from Ukraine in terms of trading its wealth. But it seems to be very heavily in favor of Ukraine's original position, which is a lot more reasonable and realistic than the kind of crazy 19th century colonial exploitative diktat that was presented to Zelensky in Kiev just a week ago, roughly. So if you were, of course, to read something that is very pro the Ukrainian government, they're probably going to tell you that it's an amazing deal, it's great for Ukraine, it will solidify the relationship. So it is definitely the fog of war in terms of negotiations. It's very hard to know what is going on, and we will have to wait really until we see what is in the deal to have any idea if it is good for the US, good for Ukraine, good for both, or maybe it's just good for Russia. So looking forward to Friday and finding out if, first of all, Ukraine and the US have actually agreed on this and what the exact details are. But for now, based on that statement, Donald Trump seems to have flip-flopped completely and is now open to giving an amazing deal, a beautiful deal to Ukraine. I, however, will remain very skeptical until I see a deal in writing with the ink dried on the page. So, Slava Ukraini, do peremoghi. See you in the next video.